Imagine inventing the exact technology that's destined to completely revolutionize your industry. A breakthrough so profound, it's literally going to change how humanity records its entire existence. Now, imagine taking that world-changing invention, locking it in a closet, and just hoping it goes away. Well, this isn't a story about some dinosaur company that just couldn't innovate. It's a case study about a corporate titan that absolutely did innovate, but was so paralyzed by its own massive success that it couldn't adapt. Picture this. We're dropping right into the year 1975. The whole world is still shooting on physical film, right? You're waiting days, maybe even weeks, to get your pictures developed. But inside Kodak's very own research labs, the future had already arrived. A Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson actually developed the first ever battery-operated, handheld digital camera prototype. It used this brand new semiconductor technology and had a sensor boasting a whopping 10,000 pixels. Kodak had the holy grail of modern photography right in the palms of their hands, decades before anyone else even caught on. And here is the absolute tragic kicker of this entire story. It wasn't just that they had the prototype. They also had the foresight. By 1979, another Kodak employee, Larry Matson, wrote an internal report that pretty much perfectly predicted the digital takeover. He explicitly laid out that a complete shift to digital photography would happen by the year 2010. So they had the tech, they had the timeline, but Kodak executives were just incredibly reluctant to pivot. They essentially took this incredible technology and buried it. Part 1. The Legacy Trap. So why on earth would a company choose to ignore its own world-changing invention? To understand that, we actually have to look backward at the immense gravity-like pull of their existing business model. Our story anchors all the way back to 1888, when founder George Eastman introduced the Kodak camera. Before this, photography meant coating glass plates with messy, wet chemicals. Eastman introduced roll film and a camera that was actually simple enough for the amateur market. He even specifically targeted young, middle-class women with those famous Kodak Girl ads. But here's the thing. The camera itself wasn't the real genius of the Kodak empire. The true genius was the underlying strategy. The actual blueprint of their dominance was the razor and blades model. George Eastman figured out super early on that the consumable film was going to pull in vastly more profit than the hardware. Kodak sold these affordable cameras just to get them into everyone's hands, which then drove continuous massive sales of highly profitable film, paper, and developing chemicals. This model made Kodak an absolute juggernaut. Get this, they became the second largest purchaser of silver in the entire United States, sitting just behind the US Treasury. They literally coined the phrase the Kodak moment. Their profits were astronomical, and ironically, that is exactly what terrified the executives decades later. The thought of abandoning this insanely lucrative cash cow for some unproven digital world, it completely paralyzed them. Part 2. Diversion over distraction. As digital tech quietly advanced through the 80s and 90s, Kodak's leadership started looking for diversions instead of actually disrupting themselves. The contrast in their strategy is honestly staggering. Under CEOs Colby Chandler and Kay Whitmore, rather than investing heavily to pivot toward the digital future they created, Kodak tried leaning into their chemical expertise in completely unrelated fields. The ultimate misstep happened in 1988. They acquired a pharmaceutical company called Sterling Drug for a mind-boggling $5.1 billion. The company was overvalued, they had zero outside help, and the drug unit quickly started bleeding money. They were literally burning billions just to avoid looking at the digital camera sitting in their own lab. At the very core of all this paralysis was the fear of cannibalization. Shifting to digital meant kissing those beautiful, recurring high margins of physical film goodbye. Going all in on digital hardware meant stepping into a cutthroat, low-margin space where they'd have to battle established computer hardware firms. So they looked at the short-term math, saw the drop in profit margins, and just chose the comfort of the present over the inevitable reality of the future. Part 3. The Late Digital Scramble. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and the safety net finally snaps. Legacy film sales officially start falling in 2001, forcing Kodak into full scramble mode. But here's a curveball that surprises a lot of people. Kodak actually managed a pretty successful late pivot, at least when you look at market share. Under CEO Daniel Karp, they aggressively pushed their Kodak EasyShare line of digital cameras. They noticed consumers were super frustrated by how hard it was to transfer digital photos to their PCs, so Kodak built these easy-to-use printer docks. And guess what? It worked. By 2005, Kodak actually hit #1 in U.S. digital camera sales, surging 40% to $5.7 billion in revenue. But as they quickly learned, winning market share does not equal financial survival. The digital camera market had matured incredibly fast, and it was suddenly flooded with fierce Asian competitors who could manufacture products way cheaper. To hold on to that number one spot, Kodak often had to sell their digital cameras at a loss. So think about the brutal trap they were in. They were competing in a high-volume, negative-margin hardware war, all while their traditional, high-margin cash cow, film, just kept bleeding out. And then came the absolutely cruel timing of the market. Just as Kodak finally scrambled to master the dedicated digital camera space, the entire market peaked in 2007. Why? Because cell phones, and those brand new smartphones, were rapidly improving their built-in cameras. The dedicated digital camera market began to evaporate, almost the exact second Kodak conquered it. Part 4, the collapse and aftermath. The stage was completely set for the final act of this corporate tragedy. The company that literally defined 20th century memory making was entirely out of moves. Nothing signaled the absolute death of the film era more perfectly than June 22, 2009. That's when Kodak announced it was killing off Kodachrome color film after a 74-year run. And this wasn't just any film. Kodachrome was famous for its vivid colors. It literally captured 20th century American life. It was such a cultural icon that Paul Simon wrote a hit song about it in 1973. When Kodachrome died, the writing wasn't just on the wall anymore. The wall had completely caved in. Just look at how fast this all unraveled. 2001, the core film business cracks. 2007, the digital camera market, they just pivoted to peaks and starts dying thanks to smartphones. 2009, iconic Kodachrome is gone. And finally, on January 19, 2012, suffocated by rising pension costs, terrible profitability, and the total loss of their core market, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. To even survive bankruptcy, Kodak had to sell off the family jewels. They auctioned off their massive portfolio of digital imaging patents. The final price tag? $525 million. And who bought them? A consortium that included Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and Samsung. Talk about the ultimate crushing irony. The modern tech giants, the very companies that define exactly how we share images today, literally bought up the digital future that a Kodak engineer invented way back in 1975. Part 5. The autopsy and key business takeaways. All right, let's step back for a second and look at the autopsy of this massive failure, because there are some incredibly potent lessons here for anyone in business today. First, never protect your legacy business models at the expense of genuine innovation. Kodak tried to protect that razor and blade film model, and it killed them. Second, do not let current high profit margins blind you to structural market shifts. Yes, digital hardware had lower margins than chemical film, but a low margin on the future is always better than a high margin on a dying industry. And finally, the golden rule. If you don't cannibalize your own products, I promise you, a competitor will. Kodak refused to cannibalize film, and in the end, the digital era cannibalized Kodak. I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative thought. Look closely at your own industry, your own career, or your own company. What is the disruptive idea, the uncomfortable new technology, the low-margin innovation that you're currently ignoring just because things feel comfortable today? Ask yourself, what is your company's digital camera that you might be hiding away in a closet right now? Because as Kodak proved, you can invent the future, but if you don't embrace it, you'll be left in the past. Thanks for joining me in this explainer.